My third-person platformer now has
16 times the detail.
No, but in all seriousness, just the resolution of the new texture is much higher than that, and I've done so much more. I'm making an action-adventure 3D platformer where you play as a once great god now reduced to a mere eyeball. There have been some big changes since I last showed you guys the game. The break to make my Game Jam game titled Blink definitely paid off, because once I got back to this one, I was re-energized and in just under 2 weeks transformed it from this to this. I updated the main texture, redesigned the first level, implemented this 2D cell shader, and so much more. The plot of the game is that you are a fallen god who fell from grace due to betrayal and the short-sightedness of the other gods. Now you lay in slumber, preserving your last essence of strength till the day comes for when you are most needed. The selfishness of the gods led to their eventual demise, now all fallen except for one, who's mad with power and cannot accept the fact that his madness is the cause of the end times. So his plan is to start the realm anew, which sounds like a pretty good cue for a big eyeball to open his eye and wake up from his slumber. I had come to the realization that I maybe gave the coder in me a little too much control over the look of the game. While I like having everything use one texture, having the texture just be 64 by 64 pixels was a little too much in my opinion. So the first thing I did was make a new texture that's now 512 by 512 pixels, which just looks so much better, and I mean, it's still a tiny texture, so there's pretty much no performance loss or file size increase in doing this. This was definitely the right move since it didn't take that long and had a really big impact on the look of the game. I went through all the models that I'm reusing for the new level and fixed some issues the new texture caused, also fixing some of their UVs in the process. And since a few of you pointed out how I might have been a little too aggressive with the smooth shading, I decided to fix that as well. Applying auto smooth did most of the work and now they look so much better. The main goal of the game stays the same. I know, I should make a hip-hop album, but anyways. You have to seek out a smith who must make you a new body so you can go toe-to-toe with a mad god. But a body fit for a god requires a lot of power, and the only things containing that amount of power are the other fallen gods. So you must then seek them out and harness their essence one way or the other. I plan on having the demo end when you first meet the smith, or maybe just before you meet him. It should be a pretty good endpoint and also marks the start of the real journey. I made the last level completely in Blender, the same software I used to make all the models for the game. This was not ideal, since I had to go back and forth from Unity to Blender if I wanted to change anything, and the overall process of making the level just took too long, and exporting the level to Unity was also a big pain. So now I instead just created a tile system for the environment that I then export to Unity and just place each individual tile in the game engine. This allows me to quickly change and test what I've done, and the workflow is just so much faster, and it
just works. It's not, I'm not kidding.
There are some downsides to this, however. First one being the amount of objects the game needs to render per frame is pretty high, and that can have a pretty bad effect on performance, though right now the performance is actually improved from the last level, since the new one is so small. The other downside being these light lines that somehow get past the corners of the structure since they aren't connected, even though they technically are. I fiddled around with the shadow settings, but found no effective way to remove them. I have a fix in mind for both of these though. I wasn't able to do it before this devlog, but I'll hopefully have it implemented by the next one. Right now I just have a temporary fix for the shadow lines where I place these planes that block the light, and it works pretty well since they can only be seen from one side. While the overall plot of the game hasn't changed that much, the levels have. I scrapped the level that was supposed to take place under the fog where you were originally supposed to face your first enemies. I might reconsider using it for the main game, but we'll see. Now you'll face enemies as soon as in the first level, but the events that were supposed to take place in the scrapped level are still planned for the demo, like the main antagonist and the first fallen god that will grant you your wings. I also have some big plans and changes in mind for the town that I briefly showed off in one of my earlier devlogs. Since I updated the texture, the last level was kinda messed up in the process. I'm pretty sure you should be able to increase the resolution of the texture without messing up your models, but the last texture was actually flawed in that the first two sections of it were 11 by 10 pixels instead of 10 by 10 like they were supposed to be. And since I wasn't all that satisfied with the level to begin with, I decided to remake it completely. To make it more interesting, I wanted to add a third element to the first level, since grass and dirt quickly gets boring to work with. So now the setting for the first level is a crypt instead of just being a graveyard, which means I can still keep the gravestones. Yay! I can also have much more interesting rooms and areas that look a lot better and just make more sense. The new level starts off pretty slow with some dialogue. The texture on the gargoyle heads is still messed up since I want to remake them completely, but let's ignore that. Then the player is presented with a very simple puzzle, just to give the player some time to get comfortable with the game and its controls. Once the player gets past the first puzzle, he has to do a little balancing, and as it turns out, at least from some of the playtests I've done, a lot of players actually freaking suck at that and aren't chat gamers like Danny. So the first one is pretty straightforward, but then I also have this optional pathway for those more daring or hardcore, though right now it's literally just a longer version of the first one, so I'll have to make it a bit more difficult for that to actually make sense. Then I made this area where I'm reusing the big gate I showed off in one of my earlier devlogs, because the pain and suffering it caused me when making it will not be forgiven, and I'm putting it in whether it likes it or not. But instead of it being affected by 2 pressure pads, I instead made a new interactable that I had been wanting to make for a while. Right now you just have to touch the handle to set off an animation which powers on whatever it's connected to, but I want to make it so the player actually has to physically push it to activate it. Then I finished this section with 2 combat areas where you fight your first enemies. So all of this together should hopefully work pretty well as a level. It's not finished and I'll definitely make it longer than this, but at least it shows off the kind of flow I wanted to have, where it goes from a puzzle to a platforming section and then to a combat section, with some added optional challenges and secrets sprinkled in. One of the new things I added with this devlog is this lock. The player's first instinct might be to try and find a key that fits it, but then again an eyeball might have some difficulties wielding one, so the next best thing is of course just to smash it. This allows me to have objects that the player can only interact with from one side, like this gate and this door. I've added 2 types of doors, the sturdy door and the weak door. The weak door can always be broken, while the sturdy door can only be broken by other means, like destroying its lock for example. Even though the now fallen gods once betrayed you, they aren't all necessarily evil. This might be a little spoilery, so if you want to skip to the next part, just click on this timestamp. So far, the plan for the first fallen god you meet in the demo is that he regrets how they treated you and wants to aid you in your quest. But there's one caveat. This fallen god has been held prisoner by a powerful necromancer who has been siphoning his powers over the years to become the most powerful mage in the realm. So the fallen god is pretty much out of use, but he uses his last bit of essence to give you his wings. With all his essence depleted, he ceases to exist, sacrificing himself in hopes of you setting things right. Something that had been bugging me for quite some time now was the lighting. I hadn't really touched on it since I started the project, and I wasn't quite sure what direction I should take it. Some of you had recommended I try implementing some sort of cell shading, and I was quite interested in the idea. But since I hadn't done anything like that before, I was quite hesitant. But then YouTube used its mind-reading telepathic abilities and recommended me this tutorial on how to achieve a pretty good-looking toony cell-shaded look. So I just followed it step by step and ended up with this. It looks pretty great and definitely elevates the visuals. The torches are also a really nice touch. They didn't take me that long to make, but definitely have a big impact as well. I think the game is finally in a pretty good state visually. Now I can really start focusing on the gameplay and level design. Of course the visuals aren't final, but I don't want to get stuck in an endless loop of just constantly tweaking them. So I'm calling this good for now and shifting my priorities. I've started making some models for the next level, and the skeleton enemies are getting some much needed updates as well. This was my 5th devlog for my untitled eyeball game. The plan is still to make a fully finalized demo version of the game, and hopefully these new changes will speed up the development. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future devlogs. Peace.